Broken Thing, Chapter 13. Russ was beginning to miss the days where he'd only had alienation and headaches to manage. Shepard was back, and he still had every doubt he'd earned about her. Add in 6 months of Garrus gone crazy. Add in Liara, unable to speak. Add in that all Russ had to show for his time in charge of the Normandy was the loss of his Ferrex and her crew, the loss of his authority. He recalled Shepard's pressed lips and tight nod when informed that her crew included Samara and Jack, as though she knew enough to predict and project his lapses in judgment. He couldn't even argue. His command had resulted in nothing. Granted, a lot of that time was spent looking for her. Garrus wouldn't have had it any other way. Everyone was sure that had Shepard been in charge for those 6 months, the collectors would be beaten by now. Not that they'd say that to Russ's face. It just showed on their faces when they talked to her or about her. As for Shepard herself, she was just as committed to keeping her crew ignorant as she ever had been. And Russ was no longer commander but Spectre in residence. Maybe it was karma. He'd had all the information she'd had, the right to demand information from anybody. They'd given it, and he'd gotten nothing done. He'd moved out of the commander's quarters without being asked. He'd found a quiet hole and stayed in it, moving from gym to mess to hole. He doubted she'd consult him, and he doubted Garrus would ever stop asking questions about her, and it took a lot of energy to keep his face straight and calm, relay over and over that Shepard did not inform him of whatever it was Garrus wanted to know. He'd end up saying, "I haven't seen her, but I bet she's doing what she always done. She's preparing for the next mission. She doesn't let me know her plans. No, I don't know how much longer we're going to be in port." Garrus could not stop asking, and Russ could not stop answering. The only progress they'd made on the mission since she had been taken was that they definitely had the Seeker Swarm counter agent. But that was Morden's accomplishment. Someone Shepard had recruited, a mission she'd given to him, not Russ's area. Russ probably would have gotten Morden killed in a stampeding evacuation on Omega. That outcome was more in keeping with his recent command style. Send him after slavers or mercs, and he was good. Send him after collectors, and people got collected. Send him after reapers, and people got reaped. A lot of his frustrated energy about her command style, if not her herself, had bled down to nothing. He wanted her back in command, or, really, he wanted someone else who was sane and he could make sense of. But that wasn't on the menu. He'd tried it his way. He had not succeeded. Made him crazy to think of following her cold, insane, lying ass somewhere again. But if someone died, it would be on her, not on him. And that was so fucking cowardly, he really couldn't stand himself, moment to moment. He knew this wasn't his fight. He was getting this done just about as well as if they'd asked him to create a Drell ceremonial sand web. Not disqualified, exactly, but unqualified. He was nostalgic for the days of blinding pain, because if he'd died around age 15, then he wouldn't have been the cause of so much tangential death or failure in the form of the Ferrex, in the form of Trireme happening on his watch, in the form of not having a damn clue of what to do next. The galaxy was a huge place, and he had no way of predicting where the collectors would be next. Didn't trust Cerberus when they tried to tell him they knew. The Geth ambush that had taken the Ferrex had been in pursuit of a Cerberus lead on Geth. Well, they'd definitely found them. He still didn't know if it was an intentional trap, just knew he would not be taking intelligence from Cerberus sources. Lawson was only on the ship because she'd held out hope that Shepard would be back. He knew where collectors had been, but surveying those locations only wasted their time, trying to examine the dust for evidence that was not there. All they found was ignorance and desperation, and they had ballast aplenty of that to begin with. Couldn't jettison it fast enough before it reformed, denser, and taken up more space. No leads, no successes, just a long string of work he wasn't good at doing. Her work. Work Garrus demanded Russ watch or take on as a placeholder. It was the reverse of barefaced, which was no right to say he had a home. Now he had a home, and no right to say, I do not belong here. Of course you don't belong. She belongs, and just as Garrus wanted. Now she was back and in place, and it was thanks to Russ's fucking suffering over the last 6 months. Let's call it loyalty, shall we? Dress it up a bit. Garrus was grateful. Not sure that made it worse or better, but made it better. Garrus being disappointed in him would be... fuck. Garrus had been there for him after the Feryx went down, both quiet and grieving. Garrus had listened to Russ's stories, not a word about Shepard. Garrus had assured him it wasn't his fault, toasted to the lost, talked about Russ's successes and projected more in the future. Told him that Russ was a bright hope in Garrus's heart. Right. What the fuck to tell Garrus about the Drell that had rescued her? Say, they look like they're having fun? Not that. Fuck. Russ had stayed out of it, did not want to know, but it was impossible to miss the cultural paradigm shift and phenomena of Shepard's seraglio in the outside world, and impossible to miss the Drell's presence on the inside of the ship. Russ had sympathy for her about the public spectacle, about her captivity. He did. He had been horrified. He was horrified. He wished he could detach from it like she seemed to be able to do. His heart went out to her just because she was a person, and this had happened to her. To know that Garrus was watching every feed, every interview, while Russ was trying to step out of the way of the unending fascination with her now perfect face, the face she wouldn't change, the face she wouldn't try to deny. Just one more decision he did not understand and could not explain to Garrus, and Garrus didn't explain to him because he didn't ask. Russ would prefer not having to know. He'd prefer to not have to see Garrus wonder why. None of this shit made any sense to him. Shepard had filed a statement to try to attempt to help the news cycle move on, end the obsession, let the counselors deal with other questions, and refer back to the commander's answers in her own words so they would not be asked to speculate or speak for her. She hadn't recorded the statement but had prepared a written report. It had been read by serious news broadcasters. It had been read by female human performers in pasties or ribbons, either intact or rewritten for more comedic or pornographic effect. The statement was now notorious for its bloodless acceptance of something that should not be bloodless. It had helped create porn categories that began with a black screen and a soft and steady voiceover, fading into scenes of a small human woman and a Drell captor. "6 months ago I was taken from Ilium. I was held captive on a Beckenstein estate by a Drell named Thane Krios. I was kept under the influence of a control chip. I do not remember my time spent there clearly. I underwent surgery that altered my appearance. There are several witnesses to my captivity, estate staff, and guests. I am barely a witness to my own captivity, as I did not have my mind available to me. I cannot confirm or deny their accounts with any authority. I did not speak to anyone other than my captor, and I do not recall what was said by either of us. I was lucky enough to be rescued by someone who recognized me and arranged for counsel support in my extraction. If anyone has any information regarding Thane, please contact the task group set up by the council on that subject. The subject of slavery has impacted my life every day since I was 16 years old. I have dedicated my career to ending it. There are so many people in bondage who are faceless, voiceless, and unprotected. Please help me end the practice of keeping people as things, as servants, as slaves. To the people that risked their lives and resources to rescue me, you are my heroes. To those who can do something about slavery, please value each person's life, whoever they are, highly enough to exalt and not denigrate their existence. We all face a challenge in our present and our near future, one I turn to now. For those who wonder what it would be like to be a slave, the next few years will give all of us that answer if we do not change it. Help me lift others from bondage, from indoctrination in all its forms, and forge a better future. For those who promote slavery, I have always opposed you, and I always will. To those who consider Beckenstein an unassailable harbor for slavery, you are wrong. To those seeking work, do not consider Beckenstein as a destination. Join instead the fight against collectors, reapers, any agent by any name that intends to enslave and extinguish. Thank you. At least Shepard hadn't turned the Normandy straight to Beckenstein and started firing. Russ wasn't sure he would have been able to restrain himself had he been in her shoes, which he knew from testimony she hadn't had. She had always been seen in bare feet. He really wished he didn't know that. Russ felt guilty for so many things, his main experience of his current life. He felt guilty because Erdnot Rex held him responsible for her disappearance, of all things. That was bullshit, and Russ knew it, but he still felt it. He felt guilty that he'd recruited people she hadn't wanted. He had not thought they were ever going to find her. And they hadn't. Without Itran, Celadus, finding her, they never would have. The improbable saved her. He felt guilty for not telling Garrus that Celadus and Shepard were sparring, that Celadus was spirits damn good at it, and that she clearly had time in her schedule to talk to somebody. If that somebody was Drell. That Celadus was now Crew. Russ had always been included in the video conferences involving rescuing Shepard, and Russ wished he'd get dropped out of it. He heard way too much about everything, in Liara's choked and pained voice, Garrus's vengeful and determined voice, relaying more testimony. The estate had priceless artifacts, some on public display, some kept private. Liara had negotiated their removal and return to appropriate cultural conservators, getting Beckenstein to cave on that. She had been smart, which was a synonym for Liara. She had told Beckenstein that provenance could not be established, there were no technical records, she had them listed as replicas, and wished to send them out for appraisal to their cultural ancestors. The management of Beckenstein had few choices there, or they could have all the publicity they were getting on top of being accused of knowing the artifacts were there, as well as Shepard being there and doing nothing about it. They had conceded that of course they must be replicas, and she could do with them as she chose. For a fee. A ridiculous fee. Which she paid as she had all the other ridiculous fees, the total of their investigation having cost the shadow broker approximately 20 million credits. She gave the running total to Garrus when he asked, but said it didn't matter. She could pay it. Yeah, she could. But that money could be much better spent, and she was buying things Liara herself couldn't use, artifacts from museums and wobbly and unreliable testimony and no physical evidence or technical leads. She gathered testimony from staff, some of whom had accepted protective custody but then fled or disappeared before or after establishing an alternate identity. No sign of Thane Krios. Everyone knew exactly what he looked like now, though. There hadn't been any pictures or surveillance, only a file from 20-plus years ago with that name attached of someone's green arm and part of his face. But there had been so many drawings. And then those drawings had spawned vid models. The estate was virtually clean of forensics. The only DNA they found was staff that had been there up to 2 days before the rescue, Shepard's and Dr. Itran's. Garrus had run everything on Itran he could find, including a DNA sample. Quiet guy, sporadic medical practice, not many friends. Those friends had been hustled through reassignment, many of whom had left the Citadel to resettle in far-flung Drell colonies. Most were more outraged, genteelly, in a Drell way, that they were at risk because of a tangential acquaintance. But once Thane Krios' name and reputation and actions had hit the news cycle, they had become more polite about potential transition, and everyone accepted with grace and alacrity, being moved out of their old lives. Itran had not asked to contact any of them, had only asked if they were safe. He was at least realistic about the fact that his prior life was absolutely over, without a doubt, and he was a target. From staff testimony, they had learned that the room Itran had rescued her from was monitored, but not by staff. She had been recorded, but the feed was sent to Krios only, directly to his Omnitool. Garrus and Liara speculated that Krios saw the rescue, knew that Itran was the responsible party, and that she was gone. Then he'd cut power to the estate and wiped all records. They couldn't really set a trap, hoping he'd return to retrieve something or return to the scene of his compounded crimes. He couldn't be counted on to be that stupid, the way Beckenstein was set up. Beckenstein was not happy with him, and if he attempted to arrange transport, he would become a casualty. Beckenstein had not budged in any attempt to collude in luring back a prior citizen. They did not want him to be captured. They wanted him to be gone. They did not know how Krios obtained her. There were no financial records to access, but the value of the estate was estimated to be $7 billion or higher, not counting the priceless things in the basement and the priceless woman that had been kept upstairs. Krios had had enough money to buy her. Krios had been absent from his estate for approximately a month before he'd come home with her, then had not left the estate or held a gathering. That word would be forever ruined in Russ's head. In months, and then he was sporadically absent for a few weeks a month, gatherings held monthly until her rescue. So they had a timeline only of her arrival and his absences from witnesses. She had never left the estate. There were no leads to follow, his exit from the estate as clean as her arrival. They had no idea where he had gone or what he had done during his absences. Shepard herself was ignorant of Krios' plans or capacity. She'd been shipped. She didn't answer many questions, but what she did answer, Garrus and Liara shared with Russ. He really wished they hadn't. Yes, she remembered sexual abuse. Yes, she remembered it being done in front of a crowd. She did not want to be touched. which was all completely understandable until Celotis started touching her. What the fuck kind of sense did it make to tell Garrus she loved him and always would, but don't touch her? Garrus had explained that to set Liara at ease about her emotional state, that Shepard was still capable of love, which Russ doubted either before she went or after she got back, cold and bloodless, even more so now. Garrus had warned Russ not to touch her. Russ would never have touched her. She said nothing about Krios' personality, other than describing him as brutal and vicious. Krios only talked at her, and she didn't remember much of it, but did remember his tone. He stole her like the stuff in the basement. He changed her so nobody would recognize her. He showed her off, knowing who she was. She wanted to move on, didn't want to discuss it, and Liara and Garrus stopped pressing her and came to their own conclusions. His state staff was terrified and would not talk, said that they loved their jobs. It seemed he loved his lady. Sick fucking place. The type of person that went to the gatherings loved to play up how well Shepard and Krios went together, that she seemed so beautiful and gracious. Every last one of them with the type of smirk that meant they were all so very much enjoying being one of the few thousand that were there to witness the coup of the criminal world. Krios had no friends, but he did have admirers. Sick fucking place. Staff was also slowly disappearing, and whether that was them not wanting to answer any more questions or Thane Krios finding them, who knew? Shepard was looking forward, not back, and it seemed she wouldn't talk to Garrus when she left the medbay. Garrus had left the ship and not returned. She had not left the ship. They had explicit descriptions, and unfortunately the allegations of sexual abuse were not exaggerated. The room, the acts, their behavior, even her clothing, was repeated in hundreds of iterations from gleeful to jealous. A lot of these were anonymous extranet accounts made as lurid as possible, but truth arrived in many of the details remaining the same. We don't know why or how Krios took her, or who took her. We know Krios ended up with her. We know he had the money to pay for a contract on her if he decided to have her gift wrapped. Well, not even gift wrapped. More of a bow. She could give no insight into him. So as Liara searched for every scrap of evidence, they ended up listening to the same accounts of what was there to be seen, not what was there to be known. Krios had never answered questions about her to anybody. Nobody had any information about her. Absolutely nobody had known she was Commander Shepard. Krios had no confidants or accomplices that came forward. They couldn't find the surgeon who worked on her. Shepard had been unconscious for the duration and had no information about her capture or her surgery. She had been chipped and sedated through the ordeal, and after had only vague impressions. So, discrepancies could be dismissed. But should they? Of course he was brutal and vile. Of course he was criminal and narcissistic and a collector of rare things. So how to account for the also rare account of someone seemingly trying to be helpful, who said they looked happy, that they laughed together, that he was protective toward her, not just territorial, that she looked like she belonged there and wanted to be there. It would be fine if just staff said that because they were terrified. Every now and then, though, a guest that seemed to have the whole Commander Shepard, who could stop Reapers, who was having sex on a vulgar marble throne for months narrative straightened out in their head as a bad and not a funny thing, would say, he didn't treat her like a slave. She didn't act like she had a chip. Half of the people I've seen give a laughing account spent the entire time jealous of her, or him, or both, and are bitter at not being asked to participate. Ever. By the time these little discrepancies occurred, 1 or 2 in every 100 accounts, they were statistical anomalies, but the same statistical anomaly. Garrus and Liara were pained by them, but didn't ask Shepard, since her viewpoint was clear. Krios was the past, Reapers were the future. Shepard would stick to the Normandy, and Edie would not allow him on the ship, so problem solved. If he caught her out on a mission, she was armed and armored, and he could send as many teams after her as he wanted. She had a job to do. If she couldn't manage a few bounty hunters while she was on the alert for collectors, and if they wanted to follow her down to a hot zone, she wished them luck. Liara got more and more anxious, unable to find anything on Krios. That in itself to her meant he was a highly disciplined, intelligent man, which was worrying. Garrus wavered between support and Shepard's wish to not talk about it anymore, and of course being Garrus and refusing to let it go. It was obvious why. If he could find Krios, he could get the answers he wanted. He could know what took and kept his bondmate. He could make sure it didn't happen again. He could maybe win her back. As to whether or not they were still bondmates, Russ knew the answer was no. What was true now was what was true then. Garrus had bonded to her, and she needed him as the counselor. Who knew if she cared about him at all, or ever did? She said so. She just didn't act that way. Russ made sure he was in his hole for the conference. He listened. Garrus looked bloodless. Liara was hoarse. They were both ragged from lack of sleep and worry. Garrus could barely say hello before asking, "How is she?" "She's fine." At this point it was looking solid and not about to change, so Russ had better spit it out. "Etrant, Celitis has joined the crew of the Normandy." "What? How? He ran far and fast." "It appears she was convincing." Liara almost smiled at that. "That she is. What's he doing on the crew?" "A while after she got out of the medbay, he started visiting. He'd go to her cabin, so I don't know what was discussed. About a week later, she asked him to spar, and I was there for that. He's good. The guy can fight." "He does have a history of combat training as a slave, and then independent study." "Well, he's good." He had to be extraordinarily careful about this phrasing, and he gave himself a moment. Do not say, "had her down in seconds," and she was laughing about it. Do not say, "he was nice about it, didn't want her to take a bad fall, made sure his hands were all over her whenever he could. Very supportive." "Garrus, I am so sorry. This is happening, and I can't hide it." "He's good at sparring. He's good at small arms." "Well, she did offer him a position when she was in the medbay." Russ said absolutely nothing about drill and positions, though he would bet all three were thinking it due to the preponderance of porn in your average news broadcast. Seems like he accepted. If it's safe for her, it's safe for him. I'll bet she wants to protect him. I'm worried about him disappearing like our other witnesses. Thanks, Russ. I've got nothing new, just the same stories. I'm moving out each item from the estate and having it tested. It will take a while. I'm hoping for a DNA match to Krios. We have nothing to compare it to.
We will. We'll find something. Once we can tag his biometrics.
That was the hope, that Krios wouldn't be able to pass through a security or medical scanner anywhere without being swarmed by security. Not that criminals didn't already have ways around that. TSEC had trouble chasing down smugglers and the indoctrinated and just the nutcases that didn't want to be scanned for indoctrination because it was an invasion of their rights. Russ didn't mention that if she got taken again, she'd just get rescued by another man who found her fascinating and inspirational and would follow her around forever. She had a Turian and now a Drell. Caden probably counted as the human. Hell, she even had Liara. Did Morden count as the Solarian? Russ closed his eyes and sighed. Please find more people, Shepard, and offer me a chance to get off this cursed fucking ship. Russ looked at Garrus, at his posture, at his eyes, at the way his plates looked like the only support he had. Then, because Shepard couldn't be the only person that had unreasonable and self-destructive loyalty offered to her, said, You guys will find him. I'm sure of it. You found her. You'll find him. You got her out of there, and that's a miracle. Hold on to that, okay? It's gonna be okay. You've taken the best care of her that you can, and she's back in the fight. She's gonna get the job done, just like you guys did. I know I can't order it or anything, but how about both you guys get some sleep? Remember sleep? That thing where you put your head down and make noise? I do not make noise. Oh, yes, you do. You fell asleep on a shuttle once. Little dainty snores. What? Absolutely not. You're a liar, Vicarian. You were leaning on Rex. I recorded it. I listen to it when I'm sad. Play it for me. Audio, or it never happened. Nah. I'll hold it for someday when I need it. That's your brilliant strategy, counselor? Thank you. Thank both of you. I think I'm gonna go lay my head down and make noise. Russ regretted being the inspiration for that unfortunate phrasing, but he was glad Garrus was going to get some sleep. Until he saw in the back of Garrus's eyes that he was not considering sleep at all. Neither was Liara. I'm being charged for every minute, so I'm back to work, but when the site's processed, we can go over the analysis. Russ thought, oh boy, more analyzed dust with no direction or evidence. And said, You got it, Liara. I'll be here. Thank you, Russ. They all signed off, and Russ was of the opinion that he was the only one with sleep in his future, and that was because he was useless.